wanted to start with a very simple kind of mission statement, where you just try to get everything out there. So it's alternative world education. By the way, my son thought the name was a little too, what do you call it? I don't know. He didn't like the name.
It's just a project name. It's like the project name is not supposed to be necessarily the marketable name.
Yes, so we can keep on working on it. I happen to like it, but anyway, so the bottom line is it's a new hub for worldwide education that connects all online education systems together into one easily accessible, interconnected platform. That's kind of the main goal.
That's good. I think that's pretty good.
And I think when you build from that, it basically expands into what we think education should be in general. Not necessarily just this online education, but education in general should be all of these things. So education should be, one, open to all. We believe it should be free. Personally, I think it should be free all across. Of course, you got to be doing the work. You got to get the marks. You shouldn't be able to just kind of study super expensive things like med school unless you're actually doing the work to get into it. To go through it. But I believe anybody who's willing to do the work and is, progressing, essentially all this education should be essentially paid for by some kind of, government, UN, some kind of education tax, just to make sure that no one ever can't learn when they want to learn and they're able to learn.
Yeah, or at least the system, like the hybrid solution where the money will be collected through taxes, but every student will get their share, like the equal share from it kind of situation, if it wasn't to be fully libertarian, just free market solution. What I would like to point out that I think there what's helpful is like if you have the prism of the sort of 4 elemental types of learning, because then it's clearly the most about money is the earth one, which is about the jobs like going into medicine or law, or this is like very traditional, very material, or like very connected to the material order of things. Jobs which also can have to be done using equipment that's specialized and therefore expensive. That's like a dentist. It's like the go-to example I have. That's like the most earth focused kind of job that you could have, and therefore education for it would be involving a lot of investment into equipment, and because like it's very tangible. Like the job is completely tangible, operating with physical things. So that's I think it could be understood that within the system you could have internal distinctions between the kinds of things that you're learning, and there are definitely kinds of learning, like whole branches of learning that are not nearly as even money intensive as other branches. Because like if you have like the earth ones, like very expensive, but then when you get into especially like fire, just like working on yourself, then it's just a lot of reading or watching. It's like what would be like the material that would be paid for in a world where you need to pay for it is intellectual property. But you can have a world in which it's open source, and therefore paying for intellectual property is not even conceptually a thing that exists. In which case, in such a world for these different subjects, it wouldn't even make sense to be creating paywalls or requiring payment necessarily, at least not in the direct form of like a client paying directly for a service provided.
Right.
Even though, of course, you can have this whole service model in there somewhere, because especially with social element, if you're learning things with social element, it would make sense for there to be the main paid model would be the service model, meaning that you are paying people, like you could be actually paying a real human person for being your lecturer for that particular thing at that particular time. So sort of if you get like it sort of makes sense in the typology of like the introverted elements, which are water, which is the social element, and earth, which is the material. Like the material one is the most expensive because it's completely physical and you need tangible things that are limited for it. The water one, you still need access to people, like real life people in real time, because that's the best way to learn anything social, including if you like performing for someone art or something like this in the sort of this social, still even culturally or artistically social domain. But then when you move into the extroverted domains, which is pure theory, which is air, and fire, which is just focused on yourself and about things that you are doing by yourself, then there is no actual real life physical limitation based reason why you would have to be paying for something in there, because
Right.
that's more like the air domains is something what already exists, like Wikipedia and Khan Academy, which is like you can learn math and read facts online for free, and you can like the whole humanity can collaboratively just create the common resource for free in terms of information, because information can be free in that sense. And in Fire, like the cost is down because it's really about yourself doing things by yourself. So therefore, doesn't have to require time of another person, and it doesn't directly, and doesn't have to in real time, and doesn't have to require any physical objects necessarily.
That makes sense. So instead of using the word free, we could just say something like affordable to catch it all. To no matter what type of education you're doing, of course, the basic stuff, like we said, the fire, the wind, the stuff that's not expensive to give to people, you can give that for free. But stuff that has a cost, teachers, equipment,
Or limitation.
obviously,
I think it's about like the things that actually would cost stuff are things that are inherently limited, the
limited. Yeah.
resources.
So you got to have like either some kind of scholarship system where only the very best would get it for free, and then others might have to pay or borrow loans from some kind of world financial education loan system, with minimal interest rates perhaps, that at least make it available and affordable for anybody
Well,
who's
definitely
able to
not
do.
the American system where you're
Not the American system.
in indentured servitude
No.
for life. That's no.
We don't want it to be too expensive that you'll never be able to pay it off. I mean, a reasonable payback in my mind is something like 2 to 3 years of working. You should be able to pay off any kind of education loan. And if you do it well, it's usually affordable to do that, especially if you can kind of work through the education.
But that's
yeah,
like
anything
this
that
whole
lasts.
system. I have so many problems with this whole approach. It's like, yeah, so you
Yeah,
make it necessary for people to not focus on studying while studying and being distracted by having to work through it. It's
yeah,
just that's not a good
good
solution
point.
to like if your
That's a good
goal
point.
were to like actually help people learn, because it almost looks like the systems like that are designed to
Hmm.
prevent people's ability to learn and definitely
Hmm.
ensure they're not free to do what they want after they've learned anything.
That's a
So
good point.
that's just mean. That's just mean and counterproductive.
So let's just let's use the word affordable for now, and definitely a lot of flexibility there in how we can do it best, and we can kind of dig into that. But anyway, it should be open, should be easily accessible and affordable to anybody that can do it. The next point there would be global. Again, easily able to create a profile anywhere in the world and just start online. All you need is the internet, and you basically have access to a global database of resources, courses,
Yeah, because today
materials.
it's the reason why it's feasible completely to be like the entry point being just connection to the internet is because you have also the worldwide shipping, quick shipping of all kinds of materials. So you
Right.
could almost companies like Amazon already have to have infrastructure that enables this kind of like anybody anywhere in the world can request any kind of resource which can then be taken from any part of the world and delivered to them, kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just then what it becomes like in this kind of system, it would be important to make sure that like, okay, so but which corporation under which conditions will be the one or the ones, the corporations which will be doing this kind of thing, because you probably don't necessarily want like monopoly, like so Amazon will take care of like this whole aspect of the system, therefore ensuring global business with everybody all the time and to have all of their information from it. It's just there's some thought to be had about the specific like contractual basis for like how would you actually create it, the infrastructure or use existing infrastructure to do various parts of the system, because of course if it became a real global one education system to rule them all type of thing,
Yeah.
then if somebody was then responsible or got the contract to be to take care of a whole aspect of it, they would have like huge guaranteed business. So there would
Yeah.
definitely be a huge war between companies and lobbyists to make sure that it will be a particular company which would likely go to the one who would spend the most money. So it likely would be
Mm.
the one who has already the most money, which is most
Good point.
definitely not the ideal choice, almost
Yeah.
inherently, because they already are too powerful.
Okay.
So there's like there's something to be, because if you have like a monopoly busting, this would have to essentially be like to divide a monopoly intentionally for a contract that's not a national contract, but that's legitimately a global international contract. So it's
Mm.
not
Yep.
just accountable to a single elected government who would be making the decision which company or companies will be doing it. So it's almost as if like the best kind of solution would probably be something fundamentally like Wikipedia, but sort of self-organized thing, but with some sort of material kind of service attached to it, not just
Yeah.
self-organized repository of information, but like it would definitely work best in sort of kind of future where humanity would actually be able to not like with the need of governments, but like just
Yeah.
spontaneously the people involved in the system would be able to collectively create a thing that works. That would
The
definitely be the best way to do it.
Yeah, the economics of it are definitely going to be very difficult. But I think, again, that'll tie into some of our other discussion later when we talk about UBI and maybe potential ways to fund that. Because you could fund the education system in a similar way and still have, kind of like we had with TruthWorks, you kind of have still mediators and gatekeepers in place to make sure that the public funding of public education and public well-being is not abused and corrupted. And that there's ways of breaking down monopolies, or maybe even making monopolies somewhat publicly owned, so that the profits of the monopolies circle back to the the UBI and the World Education Fund.
Yeah, that's a whole discussion all on its own, because that gets into things like, okay, so companies had innovation paid for by taxes by citizens, but then they are selling the products of that innovation back to people again for money type thing. So when you say that, it's just the danger is you probably don't want it to be too Marxist of a thing to do, like that you would actually appropriate somebody's company and assign into it. That would be heavily opposed and not a great way to do it.
Understood. But you wouldn't necessarily have to appropriate anything. But what you could do, perhaps, is have some kind of worldwide IMF education fund that goes and kind of creates money, perhaps a worldwide currency, or perhaps whatever currency is in most prominent. It can just kind of create its own money, just like a country can, and basically buy portions of these public companies.
So you would create an educoin.
Perhaps,
the educoin, because anybody can do that, and like the educoin, the point of that would be that educoins would only be spendable in the system of education services.
Perhaps, and I would kind of be okay with tying a UBI and education coin to a similar kind of thing, where you give a UBI, maybe not just education, but also kind of basic services, maybe basic living, shelter or clothing or basic things that people need to get by. It's hard to say, but
but I think that's legitimately already entangled with the potential dangers of UBI, because like the potential dangers of UBI with some of the thinkers that I'm watching, like Richard Dolan, which is a political scientist / UFO historian. So it's like a person who specialized in controversial areas. He wrote books about false flag attacks. And so it's like including into like actual research into history of conspiracy theories. And the issue there is like his opinion is, or his idea, his analysis is that the main danger is that then if you are getting money from the state via some form of universal basic income, then you effectively become a ward of the state. Ward of the state, meaning like being dependent on the state in a very real sense. And then if you coupled it with something, which I think is even in The Expanse actually, that there is in The Expanse world, there is on planet Earth, there is some form of universal basic something. I forgot what it's called in that sci-fi universe, but the problem with it is that it's the kind of thing that's supposed to be limited in like meal tickets, like limited to in ways in which you can spend it, which could be a further way of the government to exert control over the citizenry, because now they're like essentially giving them Disney bucks, and the Disney bucks are if like Disney was the state, was the country, and it was making Disney bucks and giving only Disney bucks to the people who can then only spend it in a very controlled fashion. So there are dangers like to these particular details of the implementation of universal basic income. So if it was like with the educoin education type thing, I don't think it would be that big of a deal necessarily for like the limited thing like because meal tickets exist as a thing, and it's not a problem. It's just like you shouldn't be giving people only money that's only kinds of tickets, and not actually a part of it, at least, that's just money for them to spend however they want. That would be like when a company, for instance, is giving you some portion of the money that it gives you in the form of meal tickets, because like they want to ensure that you spend some percentage of the money that you get in a particular way that's helpful or healthy to you. Like they also get, for instance, in my company, we get it's not meal tickets, it's like just a kind of a benefit card for benefits, which are you can buy health supplies, you can buy culture, you can go to a concert or to a theater. So it's like you can buy a hotel, like if you go to a hotel room, if you go to somewhere to like vacation. So it's supposed to be like forms of recreation and taking care of your health and wellness type stuff. And it's actually in my company relatively significant amount of money, which then motivates people to spend more on those kinds of things that they wouldn't necessarily have spent, even if they technically had the money as like normal money outside of that.
I like that. I like that a lot, actually. And that's I have several sections in my book that talk about the things we want to subsidize or the things we want to encourage people to do more of, like healthy, active living. And $1 spent in preventative medicines probably saves you $7 in reactive medicine down the road, right?
You can make a great argument for why that's actually an investment. That's not a cost.
Yeah. And so I think whatever we figure out works for UBI or might work for UBI, the same kind of philosophy would probably work for education bucks as well. And for also, trying to support the companies that are supporting, the people. So we'll circle back to that because I have some ideas and some deep things that I've been thinking about. But so again, open to all. We want it to be affordable, global, no age restrictions.
Just if I may stop you for a little bit, and this is part of I think this is one of the 4 subcategories, right? Now for the categories that you've created. So what is its name? What is the name of this category?
Open to all is the first category. Yeah. Just open, and then we're kind of digging into the ways it can be open. Right. So open, affordable, global, no age restrictions, and then self-paced, meaning you can opt in or out at any time. There might be certain courses that have a pace, obviously, but it's up to you whether or not you want to complete it or opt in.
Yeah, they have to be optional. It has to be there can be definitely things that only happen at a particular time because living people who have to do seminar with you or something have limitations. Yeah. But it can't be that you have to do it this 1 week of this 1 year. And you definitely have to do it, and it can't be done at any other time. That's the issue. Yeah.
So there's no punishment for stepping back, taking a break, and hopping back in. Yeah, you might forget some things, and you'll have to kind of revisit or revise a bit, perhaps. But there's no punishment, along the way for forcing you to finish in a certain time frame. So those are the 4.
I can give you a specific example how stupidly it sometimes works in the regular university environments. Because in Czech Republic, universities are generally good universities by the standard of universities globally. So of course, it's a part of the European Union, and in the European Union, the general standard is actually compared to the rest of the world, in this sense, is pretty high. You could just argue that some American schools are better because in America it's just not so nivelized, meaning that it's spikes in both directions, meaning that because it's not as standardized as in Europe, you can get better and also a lot worse. So the system in Europe is more geared toward ensuring same-ish level of guaranteed sort of good enough experience. So it's representative, I believe, the example. And in Czech Republic, the system is actually not paid for, the education, meaning that by the student directly. It's from taxes, and so public schools are free. It's just there are limitations in the amount of time in which you have to finish a particular program or the whole study program as such. And if you don't meet it and you exceed it by a certain amount, then you start paying. So there's various conditions, which changes from essentially from year to year because that's up to the university to decide how they do it specifically. And a friend of mine who started studying the same as me, which is journalism and political science, but then decided to ditch journalism and just focus on just do political science. And that was his mistake. Because that sort of delayed his in the calculation by the rules of the university how long he was studying a program from beginning to end, and so he just about overshot it just by the smallest possible amount, and so he had to pay like €1,000, something like that for that one semester, one whole semester that was supposedly by their calculations too much, which is just completely stupid because I technically took longer time, but studying just the one thing that I started originally. I didn't quit it. I just studied the whole thing, but I did take essentially as long as I could have, meaning because there's some margin, you can take longer than the minimum amount that's supposed to be normal. You're supposed to do it in 3 years, but if you do it in 4, it's still within the margin. So it's not inherently completely unreasonable, but I technically took longer to study and complete the program than he did. But just because of he switched a field in midstream, it amounted to the calculation of him exceeding the limit and then having to pay what for him was a pretty significant amount of money at that time.
Okay, so it makes sense. No argument as far as why we just need to make it as flexible, as open as possible, as easy for people to kind of get through without any major hurdles or artificial bottlenecks.
It's just, like artificial is the word. Like this is completely arbitrary nonsense, and the punishing him for something that wasn't a bad decision.
Right, makes sense. Okay, so those are the 4 for open. Can you think of anything else that doesn't fit into one of those 4? I think it kind of catches.
I will have to, for my mind's sake, we will have to go through all of them, and then I will maybe start seeing if there's any gap in there.
So the second category, based on what you said, collaborative. I felt like just basically everybody's working together. It's a very important kind of pillar. If you want to call it the 4 pillars of education.
Randomly, just a word I just thought of. Pillar.
Yeah, I just came up with that. So open to all, collaborative. So the 4 points of collaboration. One is it includes various options for advisors, mentors, colleagues, and study buddies. I don't know if there's anything else to add to that, but I think that covers a good amount of teachers, I guess, is another basic word.
Sure, like I guess, but that's the thing. You can, in my mind, all these typologies in real life, if they're supposed to be descriptive of reality and all of the possibilities, will always end up being fractal. Meaning you can go into detail, and subcategorize, and just then there will be different levels of the categories. But if you just said these, like you could probably have a classification, and these are the 12 types of study buddies that could exist, type thing. Sure. And each of them can have 12 subtypes. So it will never be complete. It's just like you decide at which level of precision of the typology you stop.
Okay, so that's number 1. It basically includes all these different types of people that are going to help you. Number 2, B, integratable with all respectable online education platforms. So this is where basically all the companies and platforms that are already out there can kind of work together and say, yeah, let's sign into this new hub. We'll give...
the actual free market of education.
Yeah, it basically integrates well with everything that's currently there and allows for people to continuously add on to. Well, the third part is, again, customizable and divergent paths. So this is kind of like everybody's able to add more, customize it. You're not stuck to any one path. You're able to diverge and completely create new paths and new education things. So it's very customizable.
Yeah, actually, now that you mentioned it, like there could be an equivalent of creating your custom class. It's just then you should be allowed to do it, and it then should be up to the job market, for instance, to decide if it's a thing that is important or not. Because one of the main problems of education as it is now is that all of the categories of things like what you would call classes in RPG terms, in fantasy terms, are predetermined ahead of time. But in some fields, which are very progressive, like programming, it's essentially completely meaningless, because by the time you finish the study program, a set of entirely new things will be important for you, which you could have anticipated beforehand and actually tried to prepare for if you didn't have to focus on the predetermined program.
So that, of course, leads us into point number 4 for collaborative, is it's ever-evolving current content as much as you can. And obviously, it's never perfect. You're always going to have older and older things kind of there, but we're trying our best to stay current and stay relevant.
That by itself is a radical idea, because most of the education is highly conservative, meaning that it's built to be like always the same and ignoring that things are evolving and changing.
Yeah. So those are the 4 options for collaborative. Includes people, integratable with current platforms, customizable divergent paths, and ever-evolving current content. So I think that, again, it's a pretty good fractal.
I said I remembered I liked it, and I remember see now why I remembered I liked it.
All right, so the third one rolls into, of course, how good the content is. It needs to be respectable. And so the first part of respect is course completion, degrees and or badges need to be honored and respected by companies and governments, individuals around the world. And yeah, that's hard to get there eventually, but that's what education should be. You should be obviously respected, and it can't just be anything.
You shouldn't be aiming for being a fringe lunacy.
Yeah.
That's not what your aim should be.
Yeah, it should be, free as much as possible of, conspiracy theory type education, just kind of anti whatever, hate type education of any kind. It should be respected education.
It's just for that to be not manipulative and propagandistic in its own right, you also need the functional truth works.
Yes, you do.
That's just without that, this kind of what you just said, this can be done very like Chinese Communist Party government style, we decide what's a conspiracy, and therefore nobody should learn about it. Like I said last time, I would still prefer to find a way how to keep all the probably untrue things still attached to it, like I said, the dark branches or the
Yeah.
education dungeons, where you just give all the warnings, like to ye who enter here, within the context of the system, because it's still valuable if a person understands why, or what's the value of learning about these things. You can still learn about like history of conspiracy theories, and inherently you should then understand that some of these who are considered true might be false, and some of these who are considered false might be true. And that's sort of the fun of the field. But then it's just like, I guess it's about the educational context in which you introduce it to people. Like, it's no danger for debaters, like people who have been like in debating competitions. I've just it was yesterday or the day before then, 2 days ago, we had a in-person meeting with my team of writers at Red Hat. And I've learned that one of the members of the team had a very interesting education in the Netherlands, because it's a kind of person who's very international in their background. And so it was an international school in the Netherlands. And what she said was that in there, what they've learned, or the way they've learned history, was that they weren't like told the facts and like, America #1 and that's it, like a nationalistic version of events. They were essentially taught to question the interpretations. Like, they had to say, like, respect the sources that are recognized as historical sources, but their task was to try to analyze their biases and things like that. So if you are sort of brought up with an education like this, or if this is the context in which you're presenting the dangerous things, then what you learn is how to be fine, like how to not be manipulatable by these things, because that's essentially what you want to teach to people. The like not teaching people this capacity and then just saying this is untrue, don't look here, there's nothing to see here type thing. That's not helpful. Like, because what you need is a populace that's resistant to it. Because you've taught them to be resistant, because they've already, as part of education, had experience with it, which was just the experience was in context, and they were taught how to engage the material critically, as opposed to pretending it doesn't exist, because that's the option that doesn't work.
Okay, so I think that'll help me get a couple more points here, because I only had actually 2 points for respected, and if we can kind of break it into, like we said, 4 points that includes fair to note lies, just outright untruths, might be one good point and somehow controlling biases to the point where at least people are taught to critically think about any of this education. And then my second point here, which kind of rolls into it a little bit too, is that it's mediated regularly to ensure relevant content for all career paths, and that all course completions are fairly adjudicated and awarded, that you're not just giving qualifications to people for clicking OK or paying money or whatever, that they're actually fairly representative of what you're learning, and that if you get a degree on there, that it's fairly done.
Yeah, that's important. It's just that's a whole another thing that's difficult to design as a system by itself to be done properly, because the current last attempt was standardized testing, and standardized testing by essentially everybody's consensus except people who run those companies who do standardized tests has been like decided it's terrible, awful thing that ruins education in people's lives, especially teachers and students. So, but also probably sometimes parents, because then they are forced to be like forcing their kids to be learning all that nonsense that everybody involved in the school, teachers, students, and parents probably understands this nonsense anyway. Like my favorite joke about it is in The Simpsons, where they were like, and now we're preparing for a standardized test, and they had like a map of the world, and so you expected there would be some sort of education about like places in the world, like the facts they need to know. But the teacher just rolled up the map, and behind the map were the answers to the test. So they learned to memorize the patterns of the answers. So they were like atata abata, just like reading the letters like AACC, AABB. So they're just memorizing the answer patterns, because like the reality in the joke is that the schools are actually very invested in doing well in those tests. So the schools are motivated to cheat. To make sure that their students do well. And so it's just like this whole thing is an insanity. So when you say that there needs to be like a moderation of a fair adjudication of progress through the education, it can't be this.
Yeah. No,
It
it
can't
can't.
be a standardized testing system, like especially not with multiple choice answers type thing. Like the
Yeah.
literally the worst, least scientific way of determining if anybody knows
Well,
anything or teaching people.
something like the SAT is not horrible. I mean, they've done some really good things with the SAT test over the years that
It
at
can
least
be, that's the
give.
thing. A standardized test can have a place. It's like
Yeah.
the problem is when like all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail type thing. Standardized
Mhm.
test shouldn't be the end all be all thing we're doing constantly. That's what
Right.
it can't be. You can have the one ultimate standardized test after if somebody finished a whole education program, which can be as specific or general, like be variations for specific subfields. Like in Czech Republic, universities do as entrance exams. They do variations of that. They have the one general one, which is basically an IQ test because you can sort of it's supposed to test the study aptitude, studying aptitude, not what you facts you know. But they also have like the for the field that I chose, there was the different version, which was field specific, and it was a version for uh, language intelligence. So it was a form of an IQ test, but for language aptitude. For the journalism, that's what they decided. And for the part which was political science or all social sciences, they had more of a memory-based fact, like knowing facts about topics from what we call základy společenských věd, which is just basics of social sciences kind of subject that we have. So you can have versions of this, but my issue with how it was used in the Czech Republic was it shouldn't be an entrance exam, meaning that that is the thing that you have to pass or you're screwed and you can't learn. Because obviously in this system, there is no stopping of learning or preventing of joining a program because the program doesn't have to be limited in terms of how many people are trying to learn the same thing. So you doesn't make sense to use it as a basis for entrance exams. It also because there shouldn't be a thing in the whole system. It's not that like marks matter, like grades that you get also wouldn't matter in a system like that. So there's also no point in having standardized tests being the thing for which you get a grade. Because even in like Czech Republic, sort of recently, the universities, the smart thing they realized, most of them, was that the grades from high school are completely pointless. So they started entirely ignoring them. So as long as you've managed to pass the whole school, they didn't care about any particular grade from any particular thing because some scientists explained to them that it's just basically most of the time just subjective opinions of teachers or some sort of result of school policy of like what kinds of grades are we supposed to be doing giving for what, which aren't standardizable between different high schools anyway. Not in a way which you could have a certainty that it was fairly adjudicated for any individual student. So by focusing on it and taking it into account, you would be probably unfairly judging individuals between each other. So that's why, but like, their solution was also flawed. Like their solution was, so let's have a standardized test that we administer. So it's better than like expecting that like you can't join the school, because that's I think the dumbest thing. Like you can't join this university unless you had straight A's your whole high school. I think that's insane because like you can't scientifically demonstrate that that's a valid way of evaluating somebody's actual understanding of anything in particular. So like that was stopped being important in at least in Czech Republic. But then the standardized tests, if they're also the roadblocks to further education, are problematic. Standardized tests should be informative. It's like at most something for a potential future employer to take into account. That I think would agree with that, because then it's up to the employer. It's not standardized itself. It's up to each individual employer to decide if they will take that as the standard that they will care about.
Okay. Now, the one caveat or the challenge to that I see is if there's certain courses that require kind of prerequisites of some kind, like whether it's med school or whether it's like advanced physics. Obviously, you should at least have some guidelines for the types of people you want to, admit into a certain course. Because if they're completely lost, they're kind of wasting everyone's time.
There's a caveat, like of course, to my opinion of standardized testing in general. It's not just my opinion; it's general opinion of most people in the education. So especially in the field of education reforms, like the people in education reforming hate standardized testing almost like all of them. But standards, as like certificates type standards, there's a place where they make a lot of sense, even as a prerequisite. And that's strictly the material branch. meaning like some of the things you've mentioned, it like standards make sense for engineers, standards make sense for doctors. Like there are some fields which are the core fields in the material domain where
Right.
I would allow it. It's like something that I have to agree that yes, those kinds of subjects can have a very objective test in that case
Yeah.
as a prerequisite, because you can objectively demonstrate that a person has to know these things in order to be even able to learn further in those fields. But
Okay.
that's like at most it's about a quarter of all education that exists, and
Yeah.
within that quarter of all education that exists is really only important in those specialized fields which are highly technical or where lives are at stake.
Okay.
So sure, but that's what I mean when I say that everything has its place. Like those tools, including like standardized tests, have their place and use, and they have just been misused and abused and overused. Is
Agreed.
what happened?
Agreed. Okay, so I like that. I agree with that 100%. That anything that's definitely going to lead towards more of the Earth type courses where it's very specific to a specific field or technical of some kind, then you want to make sure that you're qualifying people
I
in the
think
right way.
the keyword is objective,
Yeah,
which only
objective
makes sense
qualification.
with techniques and technologies. It doesn't really make sense outside of other things that you're trying to learn.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. So again, back to the main point is it has to be respected and respectable as far as the type of education you're
And
getting, so
where
that
do you have the respectful here or in a different?
yeah, no, it's here as well. Yeah, that's actually probably a good third point. And I kind of tried to figure out respectful. It's a little bit almost with the collaborative too, where you're trying to be respectful of the people you're working with.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure exactly whether to fit it here, but it probably makes sense to maybe add a point here as well, that it's everyone's respectful of each other, no hate speech, no abuse
Or
whatsoever.
the system is respectful of the rights of the individuals within the system and their
Yeah.
status as citizens, effectively, even if they're
Yeah.
children.
That's probably a good point to add here. I think so. Those are the 2 points: is that badges are honored and respected by companies, or degrees are honored and respected by companies, and then the courses are mediated to ensure they're relevant, and that they're fairly adjudicated, and that qualifications where it's objective are awarded accordingly. So those are the 2 points, and then the third one would be maybe controlling biases of some kind through some kind of a TruthWorks type
Yeah,
project
there
where
has
you're
to
trying
be some
to
intersection with TruthWorks, because education has a inherent relationship with what's true, because you never want to teach people things that are not true unless you're malicious and like a malevolent actor who has a ulterior agenda or overt
right.
negative agenda. So anybody who's constructive and actually means well wants to be careful about teaching people information that are true and therefore safe, relevant, useful, and all of these other things that are all related or linked to the fact
It,
that they're true. It's just very tricky because
it is,
anybody
yeah.
in charge of determining what's true has a very high likelihood of being infiltrated by people with agendas who will ruin it.
Yeah. So any lessons we learn from the TruthWorks can be applied here, and that's the beauty of this interconnectivity of all these things we're talking about, and why they really all need to be kind of a little bit considered together in order for them to really in order for any of them to work well. They all need to be kind of considered together at least. I think making it as resilient as possible to takeover is another key point here. Just make it to the point where it's kind of open source. It's mediated by open people, with the same way the TruthWorks project might be.
I think like
Just
open source is a good example because that's inherently resilient because of so many different people with conflicting agendas who collaboratively create something, or so make sure that everybody's different point of view is heard or respected, in a sense that also you can't in open source then shut down somebody else. They can have their
yeah,
own branch of the technology, and it's up to users to decide if they would prefer that other branch of the open source technology. So you can't be doing effectively, you can't be doing in open source, you can't be doing the censorship of the kind which governments or big corporations are trying to do now to quell
yeah,
fake news. You can't do that in an open source ecosystem because nobody would be able to deplatform anyone or so like either take away their ability to communicate publicly with the rest of the world or say what they want to say, or in this case teach what they want to teach, and nobody would also be able to prevent people from seeing something, which is more of like a Google kind of censorship where they would hide results from you. So those are the two kinds which are not compatible with an open system, kinds of
Yeah.
quelling what you would call misinformation.
I think the best way to do it, or probably one of the ways to try to control it, is you'd have some different groups, different kind of conglomerations of either corporations, education institutions, publicly funded education boards that basically would go and certify specific courses or specific content and say, yes, this is good content. If someone does this, completes this, and does these objective skills and qualifications with these grades, then they're certified to do this job.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing, because that's one of the better ways how to use standards. Because certification is, if you leave it up to the market, meaning up to the people and companies to decide which certifications they care about. The problem is when the state decides what the certification is, and everybody has to respect that one certification, because state can be wrong in that case.
Right.
So I think that's a great way how to put it, is that in terms of even like truthiness, that's a loaded term that was invented by Colbert. Truthfulness, I guess, would be better in this case. So even in terms of determining this, what like sort of the TruthWorks type thing would be doing is like you could have different groups, like different like think tanks, parts of it, that would be issuing their certifications of or recommendations regarding, as we like discussed before, levels of probability of the thing being true. And then everybody would be able to see all of those certifications and recommendations, and would be up to people or institutions, particular institutions or companies, to decide which of these they are going to follow to what extent.
And the more integrated you are, worldwide, as far as the worldwide corporation of doctors say that this course on this online platform is a good one, to certify yourself as a doctor. And if you get the certification, all these institutions around the world will accept it as a valid degree in whatever it might be.
You can still, in this world, you will still have universities which are selective about which people they will teach something. It's just you can connect universities to this online system, which then can form their like entrance exam criteria. Meaning that like the person can demonstrate in these certified ways, which can be recognized by the universities, meet certain standards of what they have learned and how, or which kind of things they've passed, or would be viewable, what kind of interest they have, or just the topics that they have tried to learn. So it's like all these kinds of information could be accessible if, again, the person chooses to make their profile public and the things visible, of course. It shouldn't be mandatorily all visible. That's also would be dangerous. So you can allow privacy if the person just doesn't want to advertise it to the whole world, what they know. But in this case, if they advertise it, then that could be the thing that then becomes the alternative to what is now done as standardized entrance exams. Because like the school can then delegate it to these various systems that emerge online to determine that it's better than what we could do ourselves, therefore we go for it.
I'll try to roll all that into a sentence. We said a lot there, and it's going to be hard to do, because I think this is one of the most, I guess, tricky things to kind of really nail down as far as what it means to be respected and respectable. But I'll try to kind of break those into the 4 points.
To be like, one of the simpler ways to put it is that the system won't be forcing these certifications on anybody. Right. It will be emergently, spontaneously producing certifications and recommendations, or ways to highlight somebody's skill or what they've learned. But the certifications will be, I think one of the words was that should fall under the advisory.
Yeah, under the collaboration part. Yeah, it connects to the collaborative part of changing the content, customizing the content, but also making sure that it's relevant and mediated to the point where you can't just cheat your way through the course.
Because even things like cheating are open to interpretation sometimes. It's that it should be just what's important is that the person will be allowed to take whatever path they want and try to present themselves however they want. It's just that there will be mechanisms that will be certifying what they've done by some standard, or as compared to some standard, which then would be the more objective way to display it that other companies or institutions can then consider, or individuals for collaboration with that person can consider if it's a good study buddy, or if it's a person who can be hireable for a position, or a person who would make sense to be admitted to university.
I like it. I think that it's a good way of connecting them together and making sure that those 2 points are interrelated. And then, of course, yeah, the fourth point for respected is, again, no hate speech, trying to encourage respectable,
Respectful, I think
yeah,
is the word.
respectful. So respectful no, we don't even really want to use a collaboration word here again. So respectful association, respectful
Interaction.
interactions, perhaps. Encourage respectful interactions between all parties involved on the system.
Yeah.
Which is
Encouraging
pretty much
practice.
for inspiration of the in that direction, which is pretty much ethical codexes of debating organizations.
Yeah, yeah. In brackets,
Which is,
you'd have to have some way of banning people who are, putting hate speech all over the place or creating courses based on hate, how to kill your neighbor or whatever whatever it might be. All these kind of anarchist type, how to make bombs or whatever it might be.
No, it's just maybe in that case wouldn't use the word anarchist in that sense necessarily. I would say radical. I think because
radical.
Anarchism as a philosophy is not about destruction.
Hmm.
It's
Right.
usually actually it's very peaceful. Like anarchism is about we are the ones who don't respect using force on other people. So the whole point is that you're not using force to limit other people's rights, including destroying their property and stuff.
Yeah. So let's just call it anything that's needlessly violent. It would have to get censored, or not censored, but at least reprimanded or taken off at some point if it's just.
Well, that's the thing. It has to be put into proper
hate
context because, like in the world, I think again there are a lot of inspiration because I see like I was a little bit struggle with like how to conceptualize it because it's very commonly dealt with in the debating field. Like debating organizations, debating competitions, there's no problem of dealing with the worst things. Like you can debate like Westboro Baptist Church, you can debate North Korea leadership in both sides. Like in a debate scenario, it's not an issue that you would have a debater try to defend the North Korean regime, for instance, doing something. That's not an issue because like in that situation, if it's like an educational debate, which is the one where in this particular case, the people are not representing their actually personally held positions. If it's we're just trying to explore the logic on both sides. So in this context, if you put it properly, anyone can debate anything and it's not an issue. Even if that person actually has like fundamentalist level beliefs, they can still learn how to debate things because they can still understand like, okay, I'm just like entertaining a position that's not my own. I'm pretty sure I'm right. It's like to be like a person who strongly believes that they're right. And so they strongly believe that they will, if they debate it, they will see how flawed and stupid the other position is. So they like legitimately would believe that. Like there are many even like fundamentalist Christian groups or kinds of schools who would engage in debates because like they still recognize that it's good for people to know rhetoric, like that it's a skill that's good for the soul, I guess, all right with Jesus or however you would put it. It's just like, yeah, people are supposed to be able to defend their position. It's just like they're probably learning it more so to be able to defend their position than to be able to change their mind. But that's up to the people who debate what they debate for. It's just like what it shows is that what I'm sort of personally very annoyed with that now globally how the sort of even like intellectual elite seems to be extremely fragile, and I think that's sort of the point. Intellectually fragile. The point that the sort of some of the like disingenuous right wing people are making, and so that's what disqualifies the point in the eyes of the people who are being criticized by it. But just because you're again a right wing fundamentalist doesn't mean that all your points are false. Like sometimes, like what's the saying? Like a broken clock can be right twice a day. It's just like that would be a logical fallacy to assume that everything they say must be wrong because of their political side. I'm not sure what the name of that fallacy would be. I'm pretty sure it's a logical fallacy. So
definitely,
in this sense, it's annoying to me because people, like especially kids, can handle completely fine. By and large, vast majority of them can handle debating controversial issues that you don't keep it secret from them. You don't have to keep it secret. You can say, this is a terrible, bad thing probably that's happening. And you don't also have to stop at just saying, and that's a terrible thing. It's definitely false and has no merit. And that's what you need to remember. That's also not what you have to do in like to protect their minds. You can say that like, yeah, there are people who are questioning the mainstream. We say just mainstream opinion is that this is a terrible thing. That's false. But you can also say, but there are people who disagree with that, and these are the arguments of the people who disagree with it. And then you can say, let's try to do a debate, and one of you randomly would be try to defend the mainstream position, and one of you would try to make their best shot at making those counter arguments that are generally considered to be false, to make them work somehow. And that's why what I discussed last time, and it was some of the times, with the debating session we had, or about the debating, where you would have you can have a demagogue, like you can have an educational figure who's like intentionally educational demagogue, who would be whose task would be to be defending those terrible positions so that people can try to debate against it. In a context, educational context and environment where they understand like we're learning how to deal with this, as opposed to just not being told anything about it their whole life other than like the mainstream truth. And then the first time in their life when they're like 45, when then on Facebook they see a post that like everything's different and the government lies, they will be like, yeah, maybe everything is different and the government lies. That would only happen to a person who didn't have a lifetime of educational experience of dealing with these things. Like a debater, a debater can't have that easy sort of immediate indoctrination reaction to it, because a debater will always have at least a moment of consideration when they see a new argument of like, okay, but is it actually a good argument?
Yes, I think part of the inherent goal of all of this is to try to make us all think at least a little bit more like debaters, a little bit more critical thought, a little bit more, take everything with a grain of salt mentality, where you're just trying to be respectful as much as possible of other people's opinions, but to, not hurt one another or be violent or abusive towards each other.
More precisely, of them as people. Because there could be there's a difference between hating an idea and hating a person. Okay. And usually people with bad ideas are not necessarily therefore bad people. I think that's one of the main, again, annoying conceptual misunderstandings under which I think a lot of especially left-based intelligentsia operates. Because they sort of are very polarized. Like recently I've seen a specific example of this. I'm watching, among many other things of many different political sides and opinions, I'm watching Russell Brand's show. Do you know Russell Brand?
I've seen his show a few times as well. Yeah, he's good. I like him.
Yeah, that's the thing. He's legitimately, to any objective observer, and I'm saying it as a debate judge, like a trained, certified debate judge for multiple organizations. Because that's the kind of certification that actually would be the model for the education. Like debate education associations issue certifications that this person is capable of judging debates. And it's not something that's officially recognized by any country or state, and anybody can decide if they care about it or not. But if you look into it, you realize that it's actually a pretty good certification that actually says something about the skill of that person that could be very relevant. So that could be just one of the many different certifications that could be issued. But to the point. So as a certified debate judge, if you look objectively at Russell Brand and his show, he's really trying to do the open-minded questioning thing, which in general, in principle, most thinkers would agree. Yeah, people should strive to be open-minded and critically question things, because you shouldn't just accept everything that you hear, and shouldn't be just political, like something's true because it's in my tribe does it, and something's wrong because the other tribe does it. So he's really trying. And I've seen multiple videos from the critical left who were really just doing an ad hominem attack on him for trying to nitpick excerpts of various things he said, and showing that see he said the naughty ideas. It's just completely picking them out of context, because then I went back to and watched some of the videos from which they picked it, and then because one of those was he was talking to Tim Pool, because Tim Pool is again on the list of terrible people who are always wrong because they have wrong political opinion. So he was in that video, and he says a sentence which says the position of Tim Pool or something, but then the whole discussion then as it happens around it, he's not saying that. And I agree with Tim Pool, this is definitely true 100%. And that's why the argument of the person criticizing him was something he couldn't say that he actually says these things. His idea was that I know what's going on in Russell Brand's mind. He's subtly and sneakily and deceptively doing that sort of tactic of maybe it's like that, maybe it's opposite, I don't know, to just sow doubt into people so that they, by and large, always start disbelieving, not questioning to things, but that they will actually end up disbelieving the official true positions of our political side is basically what he was saying. And it seemed that that person is unaware that they're completely logically, fallaciously attacking a person and doing trying to psychoanalyze your opponent on things he didn't actually say. That's a terrible tactic That's like you're never supposed to be doing that.
Yeah, it's almost like we shoot ourselves in the foot so often when we attack people that are essentially on our side. You know, they might disagree on one thing, and then you end up all of a sudden you make them the enemy. And it doesn't help for worldwide progress in any shape or form when you make someone strictly an enemy. You want to work together with everyone as much as possible, and I think this platform will definitely help us do that. That's a big goal of this whole global collaboration thing, is that we're respectful and open-minded of everyone's opinions.
No literal or metaphorical witch burning.
Yeah. So that's good. I think that pretty much catches it all as far as what we want to see in a worldwide education platform.